আসসালামু আলাইকুম। মক্তবখানার আজকের এই বিশেষ সেশনে আপনাদের সকলকে খুশ আমদেদ। তো আজকে আমরা আমাদের একজন খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ অতিথিকে আমাদের সাথে পেয়েছি, অধ্যাপক হাতেম বাজিয়ান। আমরা আজকে সেশনটা অনেকটা বাইলিঙ্গুয়াল ধাঁচের হবে। আমরা চেষ্টা করব বাংলাতে প্রফেসর বাজিয়ানের সাথে যে কথাগুলো হবে সেটা খানিকটা সামারাইজ করে দেওয়ার। তবে আমরা এখনো নিশ্চিত না সেটা আসলে ঠিক কতদূর করতে পারবো, তবে আমরা কোশিশ করব বাংলাকে অ্যাকোমোডেট করার। তবে প্রফেসর বাজিয়ান উনি ইংলিশেই মোস্টলি কথা বলবেন, এবং আমরা সেটা করব। তো আমরা আজকের সেশন শুরু করছি। So today is a very special session. At Maqtabkhana, we have thought of arranging this session for a long time. Islamophobia in Muslim majority societies is real and it is causing unspeakable harms. Yet we did not see any serious academic endeavor to conceptualize this phenomenon, at least up until the book to which our distinguished guest of today's session contributed emerged. So I will begin with an anecdote. I have lots of them, but let me just share one. So it was in 2013, and I was studying in the 10th grade in one of the most elite schools in Dhaka, and it was the first day of Ramadan. So as usual, the religious zeal was much higher than usual on the day, and we had more people than usual in the tiny prayer room that we had in our academic building. So there was also a masjid in the campus as well, that's true, but if we went there, it would be too late for us to come back to join the next class, because of which we would have incurred punishments, including physical punishments as well. So there was no prayer break, and we had to pray during the tiffin break, the lunch break. So and during the winter, we would often miss Asr prayer, or had to pray Asr at the last moments. So anyway, coming back to that day, as there were more students than usual, so I was waiting outside the prayer room to be emptied so that I can go in. But it was getting late and the next period was almost up, and suddenly the vice principal arrived, and seeing the situation, she exclaimed, and I clearly remember the exact words she said, "Namaz to Mohammadir moton chorai porteche. Salat has been spreading like a pandemic." So these were her exact words. So and then she had the prayer rooms closed for the entire Ramadan, and not to be mistaken, she was a Muslim, at least that is what her paper says. So and it is a 90% Muslim majority country that we are talking about. In cultural and other fields, expressions of Muslimness are singled out by giving it various names, sometimes communalism, backwardness, superstition, and other times by deploying the war on terror rhetoric. We recall the full-page advertisements in all major newspapers in Bangladesh that identified discussing Tawhid, Shirk, Iman, Salat, and so on as the first stage of radicalism. I can go on, but you all get the point. We know that Islamophobia is there. We are surrounded by it. We feel it every day, everywhere. We do not need a professor to let us know that Islamophobia is the dominant ideology of this time and age. However, what we do not know is how to conceptualize it, track its genealogy, and when it is present latently. What are the underlying assumptions and beliefs of Islamophobia? What fuels it? What are the correct strategies of fighting it? So this is where our distinguished guest, Ustadh Dr. Hatem Bazian comes in. Hatem Bazian is a co-founder and professor of Islamic law and theology at Zaytuna College, the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. In addition, Professor Bazian is a lecturer in the departments of Near Eastern and American and Asian Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. In spring 2009, Professor Bazian founded at Berkeley the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project at the Center for Race and Gender. So this is a research unit dedicated to the systemic study of othering Islam and Muslims. Professor Bazian in spring 2012 launched the Islamophobia Studies Journal, which is published biannually through a collaborative effort between the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project of the Center for Race and Gender at the University of California at Berkeley, the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diasporas Initiative for the School of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University, the Center for Islamic Studies at the Graduate Theological Union, the International Center for Muslim and Non-Muslim Understanding at the University of South Australia, and Zaytuna College. So to me and most of my colleagues at Maqtabkhana, he is most renowned for his activism for Palestine, which we all hold dear and love, and against Islamophobia. For his activism, Ustadh Bazian has been called by those supporting genocide, ethnic cleansing, and land grabbing as the most dangerous professor in America, which I believe, and we all at Maqtabkhana believe, is a damn good compliment. Welcome, Dr. Hatem Bazian.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to speak to yourself, as well as our brothers and sisters in Bangladesh, as well as those who are living outside of Bangladesh in different countries at this particular time. The subject of Islamophobia has to be understood in its long historical complexity. When we think of Islamophobia, it is not only a function of post 9/11, which often individuals think that 9/11 and then a Islamophobic discourse, discrimination begins to take shape. I remind people that the term Islamophobia itself originates from the French writing in the early part of the 20th century. The earliest reference to the term Islamophobia, which is in the French context, occurs during the French colonial engagement in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa with Muslim population, which had the meaning of having an inimic feeling or inimical feeling toward Islam and Muslims. And it was in the context of colonial discourses that otherized, discriminated, racialized the Muslim subject. And that term itself gets to be in limited circulation in the French. And then we move forward to Edward Said in his writing covering Islam, and then also his work on Orientalism, which is really 1979, 1980 in the post-Iranian Revolution, that Edward Said looks at how Islam is treated completely differently, and in essence having a continued resonance of colonial discourses, Orientalist discourses that are there. So that even the genealogy of the term has a long array, rather than only seeing it's a function of 9/11. More importantly, I think in the field of Islamophobia, the work of Ramon Grasfugel, Salman Sayyid, and others look at the expulsion of Muslims in Spain, which instituted a whole regime of violence, of structural otherization and dehumanization that ended up expelling not only Muslims but Jews. So we could see the construction within European thought or Eurocentricity, the racialized treatment of Muslims and Jews. For Muslims, you could say the term Islamophobia was not present, but anti-Muslim sentiments were there, and anti-Semitism relative to the Jewish subject. And therefore, if we think about the relationship of the Eurocentric world to Islam and Muslims, it always passed through these structures of otherization, structures of erasures, which begin to rationalize all types of violence. Maybe I could speak a little bit in here on how I understand race and racism, because we often, when we think of race and racism, we only think of the skin color type of racism, which is, again, one of the most clearly identifiable, and it's a pernicious type of racism. But if we think about structural of racism, is the control or governing the bodies and space of targeted communities. The targeting of bodies and space, again, you spoke about your experience with Ramadan, with fasting, and your own Eurocentric teacher that looks at the world through Eurocentricity wanted to govern your body and space in relations to how you exercise your religious obligation. That governing structure of body and space, you could trace it again to the expulsion of Muslims in Spain, because the Inquisition structure that was situated against Muslims and Jews governed what Muslims wear. So Muslim and Jewish garb were subject to restrictions. You can't wear distinctive Muslim or Jewish clothing. Your consumption of food, so you had to demonstrate that you are not actually observing halal or kosher, and therefore publicly you had to actually consume pork in order to make visible qualification to the Inquisition authority that you are no longer adhering to Islamic and Jewish dietary requirement. You also had to make sure that your windows and doors are open, so the Inquisition authorities will make sure that you're not observing any type of ritual, whether ritual bathing, ghusl, wudu, and any type of actual activities related to your religious obligation. And then lastly, also in relations to building mosques or having mosques. So many of the mosques in Spain were confiscated, transformed into churches, which continue to be the case till today. So governing the bodies and structure, bodies and space, which subsequently also have to be connected to governing and silencing the individual, because governing bodies and space require that the subject that is being racialized or being a target of racial structure doesn't have the ability to speak. And that gets us into that Muslims' right to speak the political or to speak of their condition is problematized. And therefore, you are actually only to be a huggable Muslim, that you tickle them, they laugh, and you pinch them, and they say ouch, but nothing more than that. So these are, in terms of what we think relative to Islamophobia, and taking it to the contemporary period, this is the operable structure that we are living in, both being visible in Muslims who are living in the West, but also Muslims who are living in Muslim majority states, which are post-colonial states that are heavily vested in Eurocentric epistemological understanding of the world, and are constantly going through an imitative project to prove their worthiness as a human by entering into the scope of Eurocentricity, and to say that we are like you, we're similar to you, in essence having that discourse rooted on a post-colonial subject that is racialized and otherized, to enter into modernity by means of imitating and trying to authenticate their humanness. So does that give a sense of just an introduction for people who are doing the translation?
Professor, I would just briefly summarize what you said in Bangla.
So go ahead.
Professor, Ustadh Bazian বলছেন ইসলামোফোবিয়া শুধুমাত্র যে 9/11 এর পর থেকে আমরা দেখছি ব্যাপারটা এরকম না, এটা একটা মিসকনসেপশন অনেকের মধ্যে আছে যে 9/11 এর পর থেকে ইসলামোফোবিয়া দেখা যাচ্ছে। বাস্তবতা এরকম না। প্রফেসর বাজিয়ান ফ্রেঞ্চ তার এটা ইসলামোফোবিয়া টার্মটা ফ্রেঞ্চ উৎস দিয়ে কথা বলছেন, এবং তারপর এডওয়ার্ড সাইদ কিভাবে ইসলামোফোবিয়াকে দেখাচ্ছেন, এবং রিসেন্ট ওয়ার্ক আরেকজন বিখ্যাত ইসলামোফোবিয়া স্টাডিজের তাত্ত্বিক সালমান সাঈদ, ওনার কাজ দিয়ে হচ্ছে হলো ইসলামোফোবিয়াকে ব্যাখ্যা করছেন। তারপর উনি বলছেন ইসলামোফোবিয়ার একটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ফাংশন হচ্ছে হলো কন্ট্রোলিং দ্য বডি। সেখানে মুসলমান হচ্ছে হলো কিভাবে তার জীবন যাপন করবে, সে কিভাবে তার দিনকে সে কিভাবে পালন করবে, সেটাকে নিয়ন্ত্রণ করা হচ্ছিল ইসলাম। এখানে উনি রেসের যে বর্ণর যে ওনার যে তত্ত্ব আছে, ক্রিটিক্যাল রেস থিওরি আমার ধারণা, সেটার সাথে এঙ্গেজ করে তিনি সেটাকে হচ্ছে হলো ইসলামোফোবিয়াকে এখানে ব্যাখ্যা করছেন। তারপর তিনি বলছেন যে মুসলমান সমাজেও ইসলামোফোবিয়া আমরা দেখতে পাই, এটা শুধুমাত্র ওয়েস্টে না, যদিও ধারণাটা হয়তো শুরু হয়েছিল ওয়েস্টে, কিন্তু যে পোস্ট কলোনিয়াল স্টেটে এখানে একটা ইমিটেটিভ প্রজেক্ট শুরু হয়েছে, সেইখানে যে ওয়েস্টার্ন এপিস্টেমোলজিকে, ইউরোসেন্ট্রিক এপিস্টেমোলজিকে আলোকে এবং অন্টোলজির আলোকে হচ্ছে হলো নতুন একটা ন্যাশনাল বিল্ডিং প্রজেক্ট যেটা শুরু হয়েছে মুসলিম মেজরিটি স্টেটগুলোতে, সেখানে ইসলামোফোবিয়া সেখানে তার ফলে এখানে মুসলমান সমাজে ইসলামোফোবিয়া দেখা যাচ্ছে। So Professor Bazian, thanks for the introduction. So there is clearly a differentiation that you made both in your book, and also we can infer from this brief introduction, between Islamophobia in Muslim majority context and Islamophobia in the West. Could you please briefly tell us what this difference is actually about, and how do you define Islamophobia in both contexts?
Well, I think at the core, when we think of Islamophobia in the Western context, meaning Muslims who are living in the Western world, but also in terms of the West looking at the Muslim world, the Islamophobia is a type of racism. It is also a structural project that is built on a long history, originating, I would say, from even some of the materials that are redeployed, or historical periods that are navigated, the Crusades period, the Inquisition period. But more importantly, it emerges out of the colonial period, where domination and colonizing the global South required or had a structure to it based on dehumanizing the subject that you are going to colonize. So in this sense becomes that the reason we're colonizing you is because you are a subhuman, and your subhumanness in essence is located in your natural state, or your state of inferiority, and the colonization project is to bring you forth into civilization. So this would be understood as the white man burden, civilizing the barbarians. Manifest destiny is in relations to also bringing around a particular colonial conceptualization of Christianity. So in this sense, the structure of Islamophobia that emerges, it is directly connected to the colonial project. And therefore, if we think about the various Muslim societies that have experienced colonization from the British, first and foremost, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spanish, all operated with placing the indigenous populations, the global South population, in a subhumanness categorization, and a series of negations were constructed. I think the work of Albert Memmi, The Colonizer and the Colonizer, is in essence really a very important work, or Frantz Fanon's work as well, in relations to the colonial legacy and the colonial epistemological structure. So it was a whole series of negations of the colonized subject that begins to really formulate the structure of Islamophobia. Moving to the presence, the fact that you have the emergence of visible Muslim communities in the Western world, whether it's in Europe, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, there is a sense of using the Muslim subject as a way to re-energize what is thought to be a lax or a setting of a slow stage of decline or lack of vigor in the Western world. So in here, the Muslim subject becomes as a tool to try to re-energize a historical past that was crafted around whiteness and white supremacy. As the Cold War came to an end in the Cold War between the United States and the Western world, and the alliance of NATO and Warsaw, and its reflection in the global South, a new enemy was actually contemplated. And this new enemy becomes Islam and Muslims. And the work or the writing on the clash of civilization is very, very important. It's a wrong thesis, but doesn't mean that many people don't actually believe and have actually internalized it. So the clash of civilization thesis of Samuel Huntington have become almost the new religious text that is used by many of many in the Western world, those who are pushing on nationalism, right-wing politics, neoconservatism, also pro-Israel, pro-Zionist. So the clash of civilization essentially, on page 20 of Huntington's book, says that in order for us to love ourselves, we need to actually find or locate the object of our hate. If we don't hate someone, it'll be very difficult in terms of what we to explain it. It'll be very difficult for us to develop and have self-love. So in this sense, Islamophobia becomes the rallying point in order to actually bring back self-confidence, patriotic unity and solidarity, and energize a conceptualization of the West that was seen to be lacking in the post-Cold War era. And it has certain aspects to it. Part of the aspect would be focusing on the demography, which is always is a racist project, unease about the increasing numbers of Muslims, pulling up red herring in relations to creeping Sharia and anti-Sharia legislation, beginning to try to limit immigration and problematize the whole immigration, especially as immigration from number of Muslim countries increases due to Western intervention. Again, intervention in Iraq, and intervention in Afghanistan, the intervention in Syria, the constant, again, aid and support to Israel that leads to Palestinians leaving as immigrant and refugees, Somalia, Libya, and so on. But it actually, immigration and refugees are shaped around Islamophobic discourse because it's projected as undermining Western civilization and the cohesion of Western society. But in essence, Huntington and all of his clash of civilization warriors are attempting to reconstruct the historical Western past where white supremacy and whiteness were seen to be triumphant and asserted as the norm for moving forward. So it has a very distinctive aspect to how Islamophobia functions and what elements of it. So you'll see some aspect of contesting building of mosques, the restrictions on women's wearing hijab, again, governing the body and space of the targeted subject. So the hijab, niqab ban that we constantly see in France or in Quebec, restrictions on Muslim civic and political participation. So that's the feature that we see in Islamophobia in the Western world. Now, coming to Muslim majority states, one has to actually define Islamophobia differently, and this is where some of my work on trying to arrive at the definition of what do we mean, because these are Muslim majority states. Some states are 97, 98% Muslims, some 85 or so Muslim population, yet we see the problematization. We see a Islamophobic structure that is operable, but it has a different notions and different nods to focus on. So Islamophobia in Muslim majority states, it's a political, social, economic, military, cultural, and religious process that emerge out and shared by the colonial Eurocentric hegemonic discourses that are there, that we could date it to the late 18th century. So again, Islamophobia in Muslim majority countries, we actually can pinpoint it to the late 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. And I think how the Muslim societies begin to see their relationship to the Western world, and this will be the onset of the modern colonial project. Islamophobia is constituted and internalized by the Muslim elites by adopting an imitative project in the post-colonial state. So the post-colonial state is structured around an imitative project. The imitative project is try to imitate and replicate the particularities of the Western world trajectory of development, and in particular the relationship of the political to the religious, or the political to the institution, to the religious institutions. That history is a particular history in terms of the relationship of church and state. That history is not universal. So again, the particularity of European experience begin to be internalized and made by the post-colonial elites that have been trained by the Eurocentric colonial powers to become, in essence, the custodians in the Muslim majority state, the custodians for the, quote, modern, the secular, the nationalist, and also the notions of the progressive Muslim nation state project. All these projects are born out of the colonial enterprise, and they're rooted into an imitative project. So to be modern, to be nationalist, to be progressive, you have to take an antagonistic attitude, both in terms of your mannerism, in terms of your conduct, as well as relate to aspects in the society with the negative relationship to Islam and Muslimness in such a way in order for you to be admitted into the modern secular, nationalist, progressive Muslim state project. If you don't, then you have to bring all the structural hegemonic powers of discipline in order to actually extract Muslimness out of you. So in essence, they're searching for a Muslim DNA in the Muslim subject to be extracted out. So these are ways to think of both Islamophobia in the Western context versus Islamophobia in Muslim majority state.
তো আমি যদি খুব সংক্ষেপে বিষয়টা সামারাইজ করি, তাহলে প্রফেসর বাজিয়ান উনি পশ্চিমে দ্য ওয়েস্টে ইসলামোফোবিয়াকে ডিফাইন করছেন হলো একটা রেস দিয়ে এবং মুসলিম এর অপরিকরণ করার মাধ্যমে, যেখানে তিনি ক্রুসেড থেকে শুরু করে এখানকার কলোনাইজেশনের যে হিস্ট্রিটা এনেছেন, যে কলোনাইজেশন এই প্রজেক্টের মূলে ছিল হলো দানবীকরণ করা, ডিহিউম্যানাইজ করা, যাদেরকে কলোনাইজড করা, যে কলোনাইজড যে সাবজেক্ট তাকে ডিহিউম্যানাইজ করার মাধ্যমে, এবং তার বৈধতাও এসেছিল তাকে স্যাভেজ আকারে, তাকে আনসিভিলাইজড ব্রুট হিসাবে উপস্থাপন করার মাধ্যমে। তো এই একটা হিস্ট্রি থেকে সেখান থেকে যে একটা সবসময় একটা হচ্ছিল আস ভার্সেস দেম যে ন্যারেটিভটা সেটাকে ক্যারি আউট করার যে প্রয়াস, সেটা থেকে হচ্ছিল বর্তমানে পোস্ট কোল্ড ওয়ার জামানায় যখন হচ্ছিল সোভিয়েত ইউনিয়নের পতনের পর একটা শত্রু খোঁজার দরকার দেখা দিল, তখন হচ্ছিল ইসলাম এবং মুসলমানকে সেই শত্রুটা হিসাবে দেখানো হলো। তো আমরা কারা? আমরা যারা হলো ইসলামের বিরুদ্ধে। তো এইভাবে হচ্ছিল এখন ইসলামোফোবিয়াটা তৈরি হলো, এবং সেখানে উনি স্যামুয়েল পি হান্টিংটনের ক্লাশ অফ সিভিলাইজেশনস থিসিস নিয়ে বলছেন। তো এটা মূলত দেখা যায় যে হলো মুসলিম এবং ইসলামকে অপরিকরণ করা এবং যে আদারাইজ করা, এবং এই রেসের যে বিষয়টা সেটার সাথে সংশ্লিষ্ট ওয়েস্টার্ন কনটেক্সট ইসলামোফোবিয়া। অন্যদিকে মুসলমান সমাজে ইসলামোফোবিয়া কে উনি ডিফাইন করছেন এইভাবে যে মুসলিম রাষ্ট্রে ইসলামোফোবিয়া হচ্ছে 1800 শতকের শেষ দিক থেকে চলতে থাকা ঔপনিবেশিক ইউরোপ কেন্দ্রিক আধিপত্যবাদী ডিসকোর্সের মধ্যে থেকে জন্ম নেওয়া এবং বেড়ে ওঠা একটা সিয়াসি তথা রাজনৈতিক, সামাজিক, অর্থনৈতিক, সামরিক, তমুদ্দনিক বা সাংস্কৃতিক ও একটা দিনী প্রক্রিয়া বা ধর্মীয় প্রক্রিয়া, যা উপনিবেশ উত্তর পোস্ট কলোনিয়াল এলিট এর একটা ইমিটেটিভ প্রজেক্টের মাধ্যমে স্থাপন করেছে এবং ইন্টারনালাইজ করেছে, যার ফলে এই এলিটরা নিজেদেরকে মডার্ন, সেকুলার, ন্যাশনালিস্ট এবং প্রোগ্রেসিভ মুসলিম ন্যাশন স্টেট প্রজেক্টের গার্ডিয়ান হিসেবে নিজেদেরকে দেখাচ্ছে। এবং পশ্চিমা অনেক সময় তারা পশ্চিমা এই যে পাওয়ার, ওয়েস্টার্ন পাওয়ার দ্বারা তারা অ্যাকচুয়ালি অ্যাপয়েন্টেড হচ্ছে। তো এবং এইখানে যে প্রফেসর বাজিয়ান বলছেন যে মুসলমান জাতিরাষ্ট্রে ইসলামোফোবিয়া এমনভাবে কাজ করে যেখানে দেখানো হয় যে আপনি যদি মডার্ন হতে চান, ইফ ইউ ওয়ান্ট টু বি মডার্ন ইউ হ্যাভ টু বি অ্যান্টি ইসলামিস্ট, এইরকম একটা ব্যাপার যেখানে আসছে সেখান থেকে হচ্ছিল। এবং এখানে ইউরোসেন্ট্রিক এপিস্টেমোলজিক্যাল যে ভ্রান্তিগুলো ছিল এবং একটা পার্টিকুলার হিস্ট্রিক্যাল চিন্তাকে মুসলমান সমাজে সেটাকে রেপ্লিকেট করার যে চিন্তা, যে ওখানে যে চার্চ এবং স্টেটের মধ্যে যে দ্বন্দ্ব ছিল, মুসলমান সমাজে ওই চার্চ এবং স্টেটের মধ্যে সেই বিষয়টাকে নিয়ে এসে সেখানে এরকম একটা ওই ওয়েস্টার্ন হিস্ট্রিকে মুসলিম সোসাইটিতে রেপ্লিকেট করার একটা চেষ্টা হয়। এটার মাধ্যমে হচ্ছিল ইসলামোফোবিয়া মুসলমান সমাজে উনি ডিফাইন করছেন। So, Professor Bazian, that was a very good definition of both phenomena, although I have some reservations and questions about that, and we will come back to that later. So, you were talking about the nation building project, and could you elaborate on that, like how different notions of nation building project has impacted the Muslim majority societies? Like so as you said, there is an epistemological ontological difference between two contesting groups, if we define them broadly. Like on the one hand we have these secularists, on the other hand we have these quote unquote Islamists. So they have this fundamental divide. So how this division actually plays out, and what's your take on that?
But I think one has to step back and understand that the nation-state structures in the global South is a byproduct of the colonial period. And again, this is across the global South. If you looked at the world in 1914, 85% of the global world surface was a colonial possession. Either you were a colony of the British, the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Italians, and the Germans coming late, and also the United States having saying that it does not have colonial possessions, but it has territories, and acting with the Monroe Doctrine across the Western Hemisphere. The nation states that we have emerging in the 20th century through the anti-colonial struggles were born into a colonial epistemological structures. And we fail to recognize that we have not went to decolonization, we only went into anti-colonial struggle. And the anti-colonial struggle, successful, it extracted the colonial troops. but the structure in the societies is colonial to the core. Our epistemology is colonial. Our politics is colonial. Our philosophy is colonial. Our understanding of the self is colonial. Our economy is colonial, as well as, and this one also one of my arguments, our understanding and relationship to Islam itself is born out of the colonial experience and colonial legacy. So as such, if we don't take account of this and understand that our attempt to enter into the modern period has been shaped, negotiated, framed around the colonial legacy. This is not, in essence, to say that we don't have agency. We do. But one has to account where that agency that we have in engaging in extracting ourselves of the colonial project is, what are the things that we need to navigate. And in essence, the Muslim world for, I would say, the past 150 to 200 years have experienced the colonial, post-colonial legacy without actually thinking through in a systematic way of what does it mean to actually decolonize the mind as well as decolonize the society. So in this sense, Muslim majority societies are still trying to act and to prove their worthiness in a world system that looks at them in the negative and in the erasure of the specificity of who they are, and more importantly, their epistemological construct of who they are in a pre-colonial is not permitted to actually have any representation or to have actually ability to construct the self and shape a future horizon based on it. So to be modern in the Muslim world today, you have to structurally take an antagonistic relationship to Islam. And I'm saying Islam, not Islamism, because again, I find these terminologies problematic because it also emerges out of a particular colonial, post-colonial, modern construct of Western definition of what it is. At the core, when the French, the British, the Portuguese, when they were writing and dealing, they were dealing with Islam. Now we have these attempts to try to create a spectrum of Islam. In essence, is a form of divide and conquer. So we also need to make sure that this framing that is being constructed of the good Muslim, bad Muslim, so you have too much Islam or little Islam, and if we just get you a, one of these pills that is produced by a pharmaceutical company, you'll get rid of too much Islam in you, right? But you never actually can give somebody a pill that will remove too much colonial discourse in them, because the pillar of civilization as is defined today is based on a Eurocentric construction. So the fact that you're living in the Muslim world, your identification of your own self, your society, the notion of what to emphasis to build is based on what the Eurocentricity actually put for you and what the colonial legacy put for you. So that's why these tensions that we see, still we have not extracted ourselves from the colonial legacy that continue to shape every part of our society. I know in certain Muslim countries, the notions of to be educated is to be educated on the British type of educational enterprise. So this is educated and this is backward, right? And in order for you to be defined as an educated person, you have to imbibe the British mannerism, imbibe the particular understanding of the self as an intellectual, as a scholar. You have to quote as my friend Ramon Grasfugel, which we had a discussion yesterday, you have to quote scholars of the 5 countries. You have to quote the French, the British, the German, the Italian, and the American. And if you don't quote them, then you are not educated, quote unquote. If you don't quote anyone in the Muslim world, you're actually not seen as to be uneducated. You could actually get a PhD in many parts of the Muslim world itself without actually having to have known any of the major thinkers, contributors into your own civilization. But you actually can roll 20 names of authors in the various colonial, post-colonial scholars from the global north, and that makes you enter into being, quote, educated. In essence, we have a process, both discovering the self is by means of actually seeking intellectual as well as spatial proximity to your ex-colonial master motherland. So these are, I think, the discussions that need to be had. And I haven't yet touched on the economies of the Muslim world. Our economies are still a pipeline to provide either raw material or to provide cheap labor force as a processing plant for the consumers and the products of the colonial global north, meaning Europe and the United States. And our economic infrastructure has nothing to do with our Islamic understanding. And even I'm very critical also of what you call taking capitalism, neoliberal economics, and just putting Bismillah on top of it. So you Islamicize that which has nothing to do with Islam itself, Bismillah on top, and Alhamdulillah at the bottom. And in between, it's Adam Smith, neoliberal economics, IMF, World Bank, and all of the nonsense that structurally create poverty at every turn. So again, this is another dimension. If we don't address the economic issues that are there, that the Muslim world is still in its economy, its post-colonial economy, is an economy that raw material, cheap labor, as well as open markets to dump the products of the global north. Luxury items are not. And again, you ask the question in any of the Muslim countries. So if you go to Egypt or if you go to any Muslim countries, ask them in terms of what products they value. They will tell you French products, British products, and so on. What are the cities that they want to visit aside from Mecca and Medina? Put that aside. You will find all of them are in their imagination are representative of what are the site of civilization or the site of have reaching the pinnacle. All this is constructed around this epistemology that we need to be aware of.
Okay, Professor. So based on the comments that we are receiving, we are not going to offer Bangla summarization time to time. Maybe we will do some summarization at the end, so that will be beneficial for both Professor Bazian's time and also for us as well. So anyways, so Professor, we have this comment, so basically a question. So you also have taken this concern into account when you wrote the chapter based on which we are discussing today. So Islam has the idea of reform. So what is the difference between Islamophobia and reform in Islamic society? So what makes sense of this question is, if I object to any particular ruling of an Islamic position or position of a particular Islamic school of thought, so am I being an Islamophobe?
Well, again, let's step back and think of the term reform itself. If you have read and understood European history, Europe had to go through, quote, religious reformation because the position of the church was hegemonic over the state, and it was actually very, very regressive. So European history, in order to emerge into modernity, which is also built into it coloniality and so on, a particular form of reformation was initiated. That project of reformation has become universalized, meaning that in order for you to enter into modernity, you have to go through a reformation project, right? And this reformation project is to be constituted around what is called the traditional pre-modern and the modern. So you have to enter into modernity by means of engaging in reformation that replicates the historical experience of Europe, which is particular but is made universal. So I'm very critical of the deployment of the terminology, because you first have to identify what is the terminology that you have, and why this terminology enters into the Islamic lexicons at a particular time during the colonial period. And as we begin to create an imitative project, we begin to actually internalize that the problem is religion and the backwardness of religion. Now, in the critique of the Muslim world, all Islam is seen as backward. All Islam is to be changed. All Islam has to go through this process. And therefore, we begin to actually internalize the Eurocentric experience of the birth of the modern nation state on jettisoning the church and creating that reformation because they were part of the backwardness. So in this sense, one has to be very careful in the terminology. Are certain things in Islam need to be thought of and examined? Absolutely. That's been part and parcel of the Islamic tradition. If anything, fiqh in Islam or Islamic law is a collection of differences of opinion. So the notion that we had to wait till the 18th century or the 19th century for us to say that there is a difference of opinion, that's really runs contrary to the firmness of the difference of opinion. The fact that in the Sunni tradition, you have already 4 schools of Sunni legal jurisprudence that were all recognized. And within each school, you have a plethora of opinions. You have the dominant opinion, you have the minority opinion, you have the opinion that is shadh, you have the opinion that is basically outside of the school. And this is not even accounting for the particular rulings within the Shia tradition also that has its own, the Ja'fari madhab, but also marja' taqlid within each of the tradition. But the big assumption that entered into the Muslim world in the late 18th into the 19th century is that what is preventing you from entering into modernity is this backward religion that you hold it, and you're holding into these religious principles and rulings that is preventing you from replicating Europe. So it begins that the specificity of European experience is universalized and then enters into Islamic discourses. And as such, one has to be careful, even as a person that is committed to an Islamic epistemology, that we actually define the terms and what is it that we are trying to do, so we don't actually end up almost undermining our own understanding and our own construct as we relate to colonialism, post-colonialism, and Eurocentricity in the world. And I think there's been considerable problematics in the framing of what we consider to be reform, the concept of reform, how reform is introduced, and what are the foundation by it. We have almost swollen, taking the full pill of modernity and thinking that the only way for you to be a Muslim is to enter modernity. But modernity is structured around capitalism, coloniality, Eurocentricity. Without and then heavy embedded in it is the racial hierarchy. Modernity is the experience of the global north of Europe, because it defines around the identity, the characters, and I would say it's defined around the conceptualization of white supremacy. So if we begin to articulate it within our own notions without understanding these aspects or these foundational tracks in it, then we're only engaging tangentially. I disagree with this aspect of Islamic law and this aspect, but what we need is to understand the structure by which our own knowledge production is being shaped around this discourse.
Flows from this discussion that the other problem we have. So oftentimes we see that many Muslim majority countries that we are talking about have Islam as their state religion, and they have these sometimes piecemeal aspect of Islam implemented in their country.
Muslims majority states are post-colonial states. Their constitution has been put together either a replica of a European country's constitution or a European with adding few elements of American constitution, and then on top of it you put Bismillah, and the primary or the religion of the state is Islam. Right? But everything else within the state, from education structure, tell me what type of education you have, I'll tell you what type of a state you have. Okay, our education is either a British model, British French model, depending on which colonial, or increasingly American model that is there. So that's what our educational structure. If you think about the constitutions again, even the most recent, if you think about the Afghan constitution and Iraqi constitution drafted by American experts with consultation of Muslims, and that's what we have. So not even going through the what you call the process of saying it is not. It's actually that's how it's been drafted. And most of the colonial state, their constitutions drafted, but they have to what you could give a nod to the native populations, the indigenous population that still have an attachment to Islam. So you throw in there Islam is the religion of the state, and problematically so, because some of these political parties and some of these political elites, they actually are the quintessential contradiction relative to what an Islamic political figure or society should be. And then structurally, we also know that there is a two different tracks, legal tracks within many of these post-colonial Muslim states. You have the civil code, which basically is just a replication with a Swiss code, German code, British code, French, and so on, or American code. And then you have the Sharia court. So the Sharia court, you only deal with marriage, divorce, inheritance, and some personal issues, which in essentially was the same type of legal structure that was there during the colonial era. You remember, for those who study India or Egypt and so on, there were Sharia courts under the British, where the natives, the unsophisticated, quote, you send them to the Sharia court, and you leave the more important issues for the colonial administrators and the civil courts that are there to protect and keep the best interest of the colonial state. So in essence, it creates the contradictions. It creates this tension within the society. And this is also my notion that even our understanding and relations to Islam and Sharia in Muslim majority state was shaped by the colonial structure, because what we today consider to be the exercise and the use of and the engagement with Islam is confined to only a very limited area. So if you're a Muslim, scholars and so on, you don't engage in the economy. That is left for what you call the sophisticated bunch. that possibly trained in the Sorbonne or London School of Economics or Harvard or Yale, because they know better. They know how to actually destroy your economy much better. They know how to work for the IMF and the World Bank. They know how to create the neoliberal modalities. But as a Muslim scholar, you just deal with marriage and divorce. You just go and deal with these things, which results in Muslim subjects themselves beginning to actually think of the home domain as the only place where they could exercise, quote, power. So you would actually also intensify gender relations, patriarchal relations in that way, because you have no scope of input in the economy, you have no scope of input in civil society, you have no scope of input on education, you have no scope of input in media and media discourses. And so the only place that the state itself and their secular custodians from trained in all these Western universities, they want to keep you there because it's also authenticate their quote progressive credentials. Because every time that they're in a crisis, they say, you see, you want us to bring this person in there that basically is using the biggest miswak in order for them to actually keep their wife, daughter, so on in line. So it ends up actually affirming the post-colonial, secular, Eurocentric elite in their position, because they always have already a cluster of participants in what they call to be traditional backward Islam and Islamic conceptualization. So this structure of the modern Muslim states of slapping Islam in various parts of the constitutions or regulations, I see it as a problem. I'd rather for them say we're post-colonial secular state like France and Germany, and not to actually create the type of contradictions, duplicity, pernicious relationship with Islam, and you end up actually destroying even the understanding of how a Muslim should live their life in a Muslim majority state. So that's what I say, we are Muslim bodies that are existing in our own society with a Eurocentric mindset that negates the essence of who we are. And we're going around almost like on a 24/7 seeking a therapy to get our authentic self to emerge. And our Islam becomes a performative aspect to the daily life that we exercise rather than living our life through our own lens. So maybe individuals who read W.D. Du Bois on double consciousness, Muslims do experience double consciousness. We are living, actually, if you're double consciousness, that's a good case. It's like we have split personalities as a paradigm in our own societies. And that contradiction is structural. It's not an individual, it's a structural aspect of how the society is organized.
The other thing that oftentimes we see that one particular aspect or one particular notion of Islam is being co-opted by the state. So what are the dangers of it, and how do you think, I mean, let's say one modern state grants a particular interpretation of Islam as the state variant of it or something like that. So what do you think of that, and how it creates problem, or how
That's
it is
nothing new. The state proclivity as well, again, both in the pre-modern but also in the modern colonial, this is I would say the norm rather than the exception. And it creates the modality of divide and conquer. That's like the colonial legacy. Divide and rule is the basis of it. And we could see right now again in the Muslim world. So at one point, the Sufis were the problem. So we need to channel Sufis. So as that project ran its course, then what we need is to really have relations and build relations with the modernists. So the modernists are the good guys. So we need to work with the modernists in order for us to neutralize the Sufis and the traditionalists. Then we I'm talking we in terms of the colonial powers and the modern Western powers. Now we have a relationship. We need to utilize the Salafis and the Salafis movement, because they will actually be a counter balance for the communists, the nationalists, and we could utilize them in doing so. Then we move and have relationship with what we call traditionalist, classically trained in opposition to modernist and Salafist and Wahhabis. So all these are part of the toolkit of what I consider to be divide and rule. Doesn't mean that there isn't contradictions in the Muslim world. There is a contradiction, and also behind that you have also the Shia Sunni, which every other Western I don't want to say think tanks, which are tanks with not much thinking, but reproduce the same type of coloniality. Every time you discuss, they just pull out the Sunni Shia, and now you have what you call an ongoing discourse. So on the one hand, we have to understand where is that coming from, and how to also make sure that we don't fall into that strategy that begins to actually shape the divide and rule within our own society based on this trajectory. So if you're telling me today, what are the favorite brand of Islam? Again, you go to the supermarket, the new and improved shampoo. So now you have a new improved type of Islam that is marketed, and a huggable Sufi type of person that is not antagonistic to the state, or some aspect of a traditional type of Islam that stays away from the political. It's apolitical, except in affirming the state power. That's the paradigm right now of the new improved type of Islam, that the power is selecting it. So it's very important that power selects. And 30 years before that, it was not the case. 30 years, again, the brand that was brought close to Islam was the Salafi type of Islam, because the Cold War required mobilizing a jihadi type of Muslim that is able to kill himself opposing the communists and the Russians, and therefore it was celebrated. So if you're in the late 70s, early 80s, if you're a Salafi or whatever brand of Salafi Islam, you could get your plane ticket. You could go to a training place to be trained on weapons, often also by both intelligence services in the Muslim countries. So the Egyptian intelligence service, the Jordanians, the Gulf intelligence services provide you the plane ticket, loading you up into a plane. You land in Pakistan or some other hamlet in Yemen or Somalia, and you get the training on weaponry. And then you go into a VIP type of transportation, and now you're on the front killing the communists. They're ungodly, and you were celebrated as a hero. You were welcomed into the White House as a major contributor to the society. You were welcomed in London, in Paris, welcomed in Muslim majority states, political elites. When that project finished, now we need to have a new improved Islam, because that project has already run its course. So we need to go, what you call, into a genetic lab in order to produce the new improved shampoo, Islam shampoo. And the new brand, again, fits that categorization. So we need to be aware of our own history and how Islam is deployed by the political powers as a tool of both control and shaping policies of the society. The prophetic statement, the Prophet ﷺ said, "An-nasu ala dini mulukihim," that people follow the religion of their kings. That has to be also taken in relation to our own society. Even though these secular post-colonial states says we need to keep Islam apolitical, they're actually the most vehement in their deployment of Islam as a political tool to shape and authenticate both their own rule as well as link up to the global north, in essence, in the service of empire. There, Islam becomes a tool to serve empire, to serve the United States, in particular United States interests. And today, just the past few days, the the relationship that has been forged between the United Arab Emirates and Israel is just a case in point, in the same way that Egypt's relationship to Israel and also the coup that took place is a very clear example where Islam is a tool mobilized as a political tool, while always preaching that we need to keep religion in the private. Well, okay, alhamdulillah. So you're giving me the theory of keeping Islam in the private, not for Islam not to intrude in the political, but the state itself actually utilizes the various articulations of Islam based on its interest, compelling interest, and often using Muslim bodies as frontline fodder for whatever post-colonial imperial project. Again, I studied the Cold War. The Cold War was not called for Muslims. Cold War was not called for the global South. It was hot. It had millions of people dying for no other reason because of two global North powers, the Soviet Union and the United States, or the cluster of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, both representing those clusters fighting the war. But it's our bodies that have been decimated. And the war in Afghanistan is a case in point. Not to speak about the suffering of the Afghan people, but the United States supported the war in Afghanistan to bloody the face of the Russians, because the Russians bloodied the face of the United States in Vietnam. So it was a Cold War political dynamics. And we know during the late 70s, early 80s, all the way up to the end of the Afghan war, there was a massive recruitment across the Muslim world, massive recruitment. And it was an operation run by the CIA and Arab and Muslim states' intelligence services that facilitated. And as a Palestinian, we had Palestinians were recruited again from various refugee camps in Jordan and in Syria, in Lebanon, even in other places, to go and fight in Afghanistan. And they were sold also a particular type of Islamic worldview. Say, if you go to Afghanistan, you liberate Afghanistan, it will be the first Islamic state. And once you finish that, then you come back and you can help liberate Palestine. What a bunch of, what, I don't want to say a word that would not be having the Arab, but they were sold down the drain to be used as bodies and to be returned in body bags to their families. And those who returned after that ended up in jail. And we continue to actually deal with the outcome of that global project of the United States and its Muslim world allies that wanted to control the Soviet Union, and they utilized Islamic discourses, Islamic terminology, Islamic fatwas, and so on, in order to actually bring forth massive number of Muslims to fight a war as a frontline pawns in a Cold War confrontation. So again, one has to be aware of that and how Islam tends to get shaped, and the particular type and particular articulation of Islam gets to be utilized both by state actors in the Muslim majority post-colonial state, as well as by imperial powers and global North powers, in order to facilitate and bring their policy into actualization. It's always good to have brown and black bodies dying in the front line for a global North war before you enter into and bring the white troops into the front.
So, Professor, thank you. So, related to this conversation, I think, and it is also very much relevant that I ask you. So, we have in Bangladesh in particular the idea that the Rand Corporation patronizing and facilitating the rise of a new kind of Islam. So what is your take on that, and the way Bernard Lewis articulated the four strands within Muslim? So how do you view that?
Again, I think you're speaking about the Rand report, Civil Democratic Islam, that was written by Charles Bernard, and to frame how the policy needs to be implemented. again, that's where we are right now in the Muslim world, about the various Islamic trends that have to be put in confrontation with one another, in the hope that the secular modernist Muslim that is closer to the Western world would be actually coming forth. But in order to do that, you have to put the traditionalists against the fundamentalists, the Sufis, bring them into the picture, provide training, create alternative leadership. That's where we are. But one has to also understand that it is also driven by states, meaning Muslim majority states, their leadership, who are post-colonial leadership. They're there as custodians of the post-colonial state. They're custodians of the economy that is neoliberal economy that is infused and is a service economy to the global north. So while Cheryl Bernard writes Civil Democratic Islam, the question is, why is it that these states in the Muslim majority states and their political elites are utilizing and using this as a way or as a form to try to transform the society? And again, my point that I would insist on, that since the end of the Cold War, the type of Islam that was utilized for that period is now done with. And now there's a relationship between whether it's the RAND Corporation, CIA, the British intelligence, and then the Muslim world intelligence services to produce the new and improved Islam. Because that project that ran from the 1950s until the early 90s is done with. So now we have to deprogram the Muslim subject and to really reassert a particular type of a state and a particular type of the society in the Muslim world. So one has to be very, very, very critical of this instrumentalization, as well as creating another internal conflict in the Muslim world. The end result of it will be death and destruction again, and we will lose another generation or two for no other reason than continue to affirm a post-colonial state that is a service state to the United States and Western Europe. Just recently, I finished writing a chapter on just if you think France continues to dominate the Francophone zone, the 14 countries that are ex-colonies of France. France has introduced since the 1960s its own currency to regulate the economies of these 14 ex-colonies. They're mandated to deposit their foreign reserves in the French treasury, and which allows and gives France the domination of their total economy, as well as create the engine for the French economy, because these deposits are utilized by France in a variety of ways, and also constantly have a veto power over the political discourses of these 14 ex-colonies. That's why we see just yesterday or 2 days ago the coup in Senegal. And this becomes the way. If you don't follow the prescription of a post-colonial state and a post-colonial elite, then very sure, if you don't play along with the IMF, World Bank, and the economic hitmans that are there, then we send the jackals. Your own military will have a coup, and then they send you to exile in that way. That's the type of politics that is operable across the Muslim world. So to think that we are independent, we are sovereign, we have self-determination, I think those have to be set aside and to really examine the reality of what is taking place. I often think many of the global South states are more like a franchise, that is franchise with a brand name that is given to them, but the franchise headquarters either is in Washington or the US or in London, France, and the global North. And basically, if you don't fulfill the obligation of the franchise agreement, then you are either your economy will run into a major crisis, or we send the jackals and you'll get a coup by a military officer who happened to have been trained in the US or in Britain or France and so on, and you can continue to replicate that type of process. So the civil democratic Islam thesis that have been put forth by Rand It is put forth in a post-colonial state that has not yet extricated itself from any aspect of colonial control.
Okay, so
I can hear you.
and can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So we are talking about the Eurocentric worldview that we have, and the neo-colonial power structure that we are having to live in, we are compelled to live in. But what we find in this paradigm is that there are local elites who are willingly and very much actively supporting the neo-colonial powers, which often differ from the old colonial masters. For example, in many cases, they might have been ex-British colonial possessions, but they are now taking their dictates from the US. So, but the colonial power matrix hasn't changed. But anyway, so how we have talked about it. You have also brought in the theories that Frantz Fanon introduced. But I would like you to briefly articulate Fanon's and others' theory on the internalization of Orientalist discourses that produce the inferiority complex that I believe is responsible for much of Islamophobia, internalized Islamophobia we see in Muslim countries.
Well, I think that will be a whole new lecture, but let me try maybe to bring the last strands in the last conversation forward. We are still living in a post-colonial world. The post-colonial world is structured on that the elites that are running and governing the post-colonial states have been trained in by the colonial powers or the post-colonial powers in the global north. If you look at all of your local elites in the Muslim majority states, and if you think and look at where their credentials come from, you will find that their credentials overwhelmingly, without exception, come from their ex-colonial motherland or a colonial relationship, whether it's Britain, France, Germany, Italy, UK, United States, and to some lesser extent, the Soviet Union or Russia in the present context. They were trained to be managers and to replicate the modalities, economic modalities, political modalities, socio-cultural modalities, religious modalities that have been crafted in the colonial world. And in as such, they also internalize their inferiority because they have set a discourse of imitation, which is something I speak about, that is structured on not having your own consciousness, self-awareness, understanding of your history, your legacy, and what brought you to this world in the way that can have a uniqueness to it. So that internalization becomes part of, again, of being in the world without actually being in the world on your own accords. And again, I'm not in here in terms of as a cultural exclusivist. I think Muslim history shows the dynamic nature of the Islamic societies, that it was always able to function in multi-cultural, multi-religious, multilinguistic, and so on setting. So in this sense, the local elites that are there are managing and governing the structure to maintain the post-colonial state firmly established in its colonial legacies. I'm a person that believes that you have to engage in an intellectual, scholarly, educational project. that it's not a matter of only saying, well, it's wrong, and put your hands to the sky and say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no power except by Allah, which is an accurate theological point, but you need to actually structurally and systematically undo it. And one of the first and foremost is to actually reshape education. That's what I say. If you tell me what you educate your children and what type of schooling, what type of structure in education you have, then I could tell you what type of society you're going to have. Stephen Biko said the most dangerous weapons in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed, because we internalize the inferiority and the superiority, and therefore we are actually not going to cross that boundary of actually asserting that we want to see the world that we are in and the world we experience through our own eyes, without having to have a colonial Eurocentric lens that's shaping everything in our own society and understanding our economy and so on. So that educational project has to be undertaken. The second part is that we have to think about our economic relations. And this is not tipping into discourse on Marxist theory or Marxism and class analysis, which is, again, it's valid issues. Again, from Islamic tradition, thinking through class issues is there. That's why you have a zakat that actually, if you think about it, is structured and look at class basis relative to how to address the needs of the society. But we need to think of the economy of the society. I don't think that Islamic economics can be based on replicating capitalism. I don't think that we could take capitalism in a big swoop and also tie it around the identity of the Prophet ﷺ and the first period by saying, well, the Prophet ﷺ was a merchant, Abu Bakr was a merchant, Umar was a merchant, Uthman was a merchant, and as such, then Islam is a pro-capitalist, pro-private enterprise. This is what you call a statement of truth that is intended to actually push a falsehood, which is that the modern capitalist economic modalities, the same modalities that the Prophet ﷺ and the early community have practiced. So we need to actually be very critical of what I consider to be the Muslim success theology that pushes capitalism and embraces neoliberal economics, privatization, which is in essence maintaining and extending the post-colonial, the colonial to the post-colonial, and continuing to actually create structured poverty in the global South. And I'm not the only one speaking about it. Again, there are many who writes about it, but this is something for us. In order to extricate ourselves, we have to think deep thinking relative to the economic structure that are there. So education, both education in the larger sense, but education about our Islamic understanding of what does it mean to have an Islamic epistemology, what does it mean to have a structure that is rooted in it, and then understanding the economic issues, and then begin also to theorize about our political structure. One of the two of the areas that are least theorized in Muslim literature is both the political structure and political theory as a theory, and then also Muslim economic theory and what does it mean to have an economic theory. There's a lot of work on what you call acts of worship. There's volumes and volumes. There's volumes and volumes on marriage, divorce. There are volumes on all types of, these are two areas I find them to be least theorized in terms of what is needed in order for us to emerge out of the context that we find ourselves in the post-colonial period.
Anyway, so Ustad, we are talking about a lot of things, but there is one part in the chapter that you wrote that says that the search for pristine Islam is a problem and it is part of the Islamophobia industry. So I would first like you to explain what you mean by it, and then okay, let's hear
let
it
me
first.
let me get into this understanding. Is this notion that there is a pristine Islam that you could go and search for, and in searching for, you could locate it in a particular notion, but until you locate it, you are a deficient person. So in essence, it's for me, this search is immobilizing. It is also construct Islam not as a historically living tradition that continues to unfold from the time of the Prophet ﷺ all the way up to the contemporary period, which means that everything you deal with as a Muslim is a set of negations because you have not located the pristine Islam. And increasingly, that pristine Islam is basically produced to us courtesy of a state power or a state-appointed mufti, or possibly a delegation that comes out from the Western world to tell us how we don't know what pristine Islam, but because we have went to the mountaintop of power and privilege and understanding, that we could tell you what pristine Islam is there. So for me, Islam is a living tradition that exists in all its complexities, and every generation we do have to engage the text and apply it to the context that we are in to extract the kernels that gives us the wisdom to deal with the contradictions, the difficulties, the challenges, the pains, the suffering, the happiness, the moments of joy that we all experience. So Islam itself is a living tradition that navigates through all these four. Now, this should not be misunderstood, that there is, when the Prophet ﷺ was alive, that is the moment of pristine Islam, because the Prophet was receiving revelation in his early community. So I'm not here negating the existence of a formative foundational period with the prophetic presence in the mix of the society. What I'm challenging, this notion that everything that occurs in these 1400 years, as well as our own experience with Islam, is all, in essence, is a negation. And what we need is to search for pristine Islam. And until we locate it, then we just sit there and not do anything and not engage in the world that is provided for us. The God that created or provided Islam in the formative period, the same God that exists today, and allowed us to engage what revelations, what text that we have in order to apply it into our context. What happens these days is that as a state project, it tells you that whatever you are saying about Islam is wrong because you don't represent pristine Islam. And who represents pristine Islam is a person who's been trained by London School of Economics, who comes and tells us, I'll tell you what pristine Islam is. Basically, is not that different than Adam Smith. Again, so I'm just using this as a, what you call a way to understand what I'm referring relative to this notion. It is a deployment of a discourse to disempower, to silence, to immobilize, to actually create the persons like, I am walking in the world not having an understanding or relating to pristine Islam, so I must be wrong and I must be unauthentic. And this is not, has nothing to do with a person committing wrong sin. And I am all for individuals who commit sin. Again, we have halal and haram in the tradition. We have a repentance. We have istighfar. All those are according, but that we are creating a person in the civil society, in the world, that is actually living a series of negation, which itself is structured around colonization. I have to actually, I have another engagement soon, so if we could conclude the discussion. I know we could go on for hours, and it's a pleasure, but I accorded about an hour and a half for it.
Okay, so just one last question, maybe, or do we finish right now?
I think if we could conclude.
Okay. Thank you.
I promise to come back again another time. So this is not a closing of the door, but hopefully that we'll have other opportunities to delve in other issues as well. But it was a pleasure to speak to you and speak to the community.
Yeah. By the way, I have a question that is a bit personal. So, are you a Palestinian?
What? What is it? Yeah, I'm Palestinian. My family originally from. My father is from the city of Nablus in the West Bank. My mother is from the city of Jerusalem. So I'm a Palestinian, but I'm active in a variety of struggles, not only in Palestine, but the Muslim world, in Kashmir, the situation of the Uyghur, the Myanmar. I finished a project on Islamophobia in India. We're about to release another project. So again, we have to be, again, as a Muslim, I have to be concerned about whatever pain and suffering that befalls the Muslims, the Yemen, Syria, situation in Bangladesh with both the political situation, the economic situation, COVID-19, the various, I would say, neoliberal economic modalities that have been set in motion. I followed a number of these buildings that collapsed as a result of Shari regulations in there. All these are aspects and features that we all have to be aware and constantly really think about on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you, Professor Bazian. And I think it has been a long time since the Bangladeshi community has heard from a Palestinian directly. I mean, we talk about Palestine all the day, and we pray, and also our hearts.
Session on Palestine, inshallah, in the future. I promise.
Inshallah. And we will also have a more discussion on Islamophobia as well, and some blind spots in the emerging field of Islamophobia studies. Thank you, Professor Bazian, and I will summarize our discussion probably briefly. Thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and we are all were very excited, and we all are honored very much to have you with us today.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. প্রফেসর বাজিয়ান এতক্ষণ হচ্ছে আমাদেরকে ইসলামোফোবিয়ার বিভিন্ন দিক নিয়ে ব্যাখ্যা করলেন। তো আমরা মুসলমান সমাজ ইসলামোফোবিয়া বেশ কিছু বিষয় জানলাম, যে র্যান্ড কর্পোরেশন এবং সার্চ ফর প্রিস্টিন ইসলাম, একটা যেভাবে হচ্ছে হলো আজকে ইসলাম নিয়ে কথা বলতে গেলে বাহির থেকে একটা স্বীকৃতি নিয়ে আসতে হয়, অনুমোদন নিয়ে আসতে হয়। তো এই ধরনের যে চিন্তাগুলো আছে, তো সেগুলো আমরা জানলাম। আমার মনে হয় সামারিটা আমরা অন্য আরেক সময় আরেকটা ভিডিওতে আমরা এখানে সামারিটা করতে পারি, বা আমরা এটা ক্যাপশনটা অ্যাড করে দিতে পারি। ইনশাআল্লাহ আমরা প্রফেসর বাজিয়ানকে আমরা আবার নিয়ে আসবো। আমাদের সাথে থাকার জন্য সকলকে অনেক বেশি শুকরিয়া। আজকে অনেক অডিয়েন্স ছিলেন, অনেকের প্রশ্ন আমরা নিতে পারিনি বিভিন্ন কারণে, প্রফেসর বাজিয়ানের একটা অন্য কমিটমেন্টও ছিল। সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।